Welcome back to the podcast, everybody. Today's topic is clinical obesity and 5 important action steps that you can take starting today to start turning things around if you are clinically obese so that you have a brighter future where you're staying out of the hospital and off of meds. My name is Coach Val Fiott. Before we get into all the great information that I have for you here today, I'm going to ask for you to like and subscribe so you get more videos like this and so that you can help this video in the algorithm. All right, so that said, first let's define what clinical obesity is, because this is pretty confusing to people because clients will tell me that, well, when I go to the doctor, there's a big chart on the wall and the chart says that, based on my height, I can weigh between this and this. And that information is pretty misleading because for one, it's so incredibly broad that it doesn't really tell you much. It's usually a really, really broad spectrum, and it doesn't really define obesity. When we're talking about clinical obesity in terms of exercise science and longevity and health science, what we're really looking at is what is that statistical percentage at which once we reach that percentage, we're very likely to start having health problems, especially health problems that are likely to eventually be our cause of death. So I know that's pretty morose, but that's ultimately what we're looking at. And there are many, many different groups that have defined clinical obesity all a little bit differently. But if I'm to aggregate the studies from the groups that best understand it, that best are looking at all the data points and really understanding what obesity really is, I would tell you that for women, depending upon age, it's generally about 30 to 35%, somewhere in that range, depending upon a woman's age, is going to be where we start clinically seeing that woman as obese. With men, it's generally 25 to about 26 or 27%. Again, age is part of it. And in some cases, even race influences a little bit of how much body fat should be on your body as compared to muscle. And in case it's not clear, that's ultimately how we're determining what obesity is. It's not just how much fat is on your body, but how much fat as compared to your lean mass. So what this really means is because it's ultimately a ratio, the more muscle and essentially bone mineral density that you have in your total mass, really the more body fat is acceptable healthfully before you start to create health problems. And so it's really the wider that gap gets, the more body fat you have as compared to muscle, that's where we get more into obesity and we get more into health risk. And the more you close that gap, the better your health is going to be in general as this metric goes. And of course, there's many other variables as well, because we've also got nutrition and hydration and stress and all these other factors. All right, so all that said, now that you have a good understanding of what clinical obesity really is and how it's defined and what it really means, now let's talk about the 5 action steps that I highly recommend you take to start turning things around right away, okay? The very first thing I want to talk to you about is your psychology. And I know that's not usually how these videos go. Usually we just want to dive in with physical things that we can do. But I can tell you that those physical things don't do much unless you go in with the right state of mind. It's just like getting a new job. It's just like going into a relationship. It's just like any kind of athleticism. You absolutely have to be keyed in mentally if you're going to expect to create sustainable, lasting success. And of course, that's what I want you to be able to create for yourself. So that said, visualize what this is going to be like. Visualize the trade-offs. Visualize that you are now going to be exercising. If you're already exercising, the exercise is going to be more specific. It's probably going to be more challenging than what you're used to, maybe more frequent as well. Visualize that throughout the day. Keep thinking about what that's going to be like to be exercising either at home or outside. Think about what that intensity might be like, having that sweat dripping down your face. All of these things are important because if you just throw yourself into the kind of program that I'm going to suggest for you, unless your mind is keyed in, you're not going to make it sustainable. You're not going to feel good about it. You're going to keep asking yourself, why am I doing this? So what I suggest is visualize. Visualize the meal planning, visualize the exercise component, getting to bed at a solid hour every night. We'll talk more about that shortly. And just start telling yourself, yes, this is going to be the new me. This is what I want to do for myself. The sacrifices that I'm going to make are well worth it for the health and the wellness that I'm going to build. All right, so all that said, let's go ahead and move on now to the number 2 action item that I have for you. And now the way that you'll enjoy this number 2 item is by taking pride in the fact that this is going to give you all the information that you're going to really need to know to make some substantial change through nutrition. And this number 2 action item is to take a diet diary of your normal eating and drinking habits for at least 2 days, preferably more like 4 or 5 days. The more accurate and realistic that you can be in this sample data of what you normally eat and drink, the better you're going to be served when we put together your meal plan in step 3. And the reason for that is you want to have a real understanding of how many calories are coming in each day from protein and from carbs and from fats. If you don't know, if you don't have a realistic understanding of that, we're probably not going to get very far. So you want to be you don't want to put on airs. You want to be very realistic when you're getting this diet diary information. Now, there are plenty of apps that can help you. MyFitnessPal is one of many, but these apps will help you to track what you're eating, and please eat the way you normally eat. Don't put on airs because you're now tracking, and don't say to yourself, well, I'm going to start eating more healthfully now. No. We want to actually get an understanding of what your normal eating is like. So if you go have 8 slices of pizza on a normal day, all right, great. Work that into your meal plan. You've got a limited time left to do that, but it's important so we can track and know what your eating habits are normally like, so that when we make the change in step 3, that we don't make too big a change or too little. And it's time to talk about that now. Let's move on to step 3. Okay, once we've got your diet diary of at least 2, preferably more than that, days, and we know roughly how much protein you're used to each day, roughly how many carbs, how many fats, now it's time to start making changes. And like I was saying a moment ago, too big of a change, too big of a calorie deficit, although it can be great for weight loss initially, it is not going to work in the long term. It is really potentially going to mess you up. Now, on the other hand, there is a chance that you might need to eat more in order to lose weight. And I know that really sounds funny, but if you're already really under consuming, if your normal day is a very low number of calories and a particularly low amount of protein, there's a very good chance that we actually need to start with a strategy of increasing not only your protein, but potentially even your carbs and fats. This will really just depend upon a lot of factors, but we might need to do that in order to first get your metabolism up and then start really sorting through and figuring out exactly how many carbs and fats and proteins are going to be good for the long run. Now, when it comes to putting together your meal plan, I know it can be very tempting to use one of the apps like MyFitnessPal or some of the other apps out there. I don't recommend this because although that information is following a few key guidelines, it's not going to consider everything. It's not going to be able to consider your history. If you're someone who's had a big history of yo-yo dieting or fad dieting and who might have a very depressed metabolism, it also isn't really going to consider what your lean tissue is like. And long story short, there's a lot of data points that go into really proper macronutrient and meal planning. And the apps online can only take into account a very few key factors. In some cases, that's enough to do the job, but overwhelmingly, I don't suggest it. If you do have the kind of budget where you can really work with this, I would suggest getting your macros written professionally. We do it here at Perfect Personal Training. I can do this myself for you if you'd like. And I just think it's a far better way to go. I see far, far better success when it's written by a person who can really talk with you and go over a lot of factors together. All right, now all of this brings us to step 4, okay? And just to recap real quick, we talked about visualizing and getting your mind right and psyching yourself up for what the sacrifices are going to look like, as well as the rewards. We also talked about the diet diary, and then we talked about meal planning. Now let's get into the time management portion of all of this. Now, this is where most people go wrong, and most people don't think about this step. Again, we're generally action-driven as people, so we want to just say, tell me what to do and I'll do it. And we fail to recognize that most of the time that does not work because you've got to have a time budget. And so what ends up happening historically is clients will come back to their coach and they'll say, I don't have time to work out that much, or I don't have time to plan out my meals. I didn't think it was going to take so long. So my suggestions for you are this: carve out 45 minutes to an hour each and every day, 7 days a week for meal planning. Literally 45 minutes to an hour. I'm not saying it's going to take that long, but I prefer that you leave yourself that much time so that you can look certain foods up and you can take all the notes you need to take and work with your apps and do what you need to do for meal planning and give yourself enough time to make that work. And then for exercise, if you're very new to exercise, give yourself 30 minutes a day, 6 days per week. If you're not that new, if you've already been exercising for a few weeks or more, then give yourself an hour. And that's not going to count any kind of drive time if you're going to be driving to a gym or to a studio. Then you'll need that on top of it. So altogether, you could be looking at roughly 2 hours or so a day, most days of the week. But this is what it's going to take. I know in some cases it might take less, but give yourself more than enough time. Believe me, you are worth those couple of hours a day. Now, before we get on to the final step, let's talk a little bit more about part 4 here. I talked about the time management component. Let me touch briefly on what the exercise component needs to look like. So generally speaking, you're going to want strength training about 3 days per week, sometimes 4. And you're generally going to want cardio roughly 2 days a week, sometimes 3. All of this really depends a lot upon the different clinical guidelines that are going to be appropriate to you. And I think the important thing you need to understand is that every one of you is going to have very different physiological needs. And there's also some wiggle room on those needs where we can work more into your psychology. So if someone told me, Val, I hate cardio so much, I would rather do this without cardio, we can do that. It's not generally the best way to go. You generally do want some cardio component for most people. But if your psychology is that way, then okay, let's work it out where you don't need the cardio, where we make up for some of those cardiovascular benefits through more of a circuit style form of training on at least 2 or 3 days per week. That can work just fine for most people. In other cases, you might say, I absolutely am intimidated by weights. I don't want to lift weights. I don't do anything like that. Well, we're still going to need some level of resistance training, but we can modify things. So again, you get some of those benefits without necessarily lifting weights or anything like that. There's a lot of wiggle room if you have the right coach to help you figure out exactly what's going to work for you, and then just keep making modifications every week. So you're progressing and still keeping your safety profile high. That's all I'll say about the exercise portion of this here. Let's go ahead and move on to number 5. Of course, there's lots of other videos on this channel about proper exercise prescription, and you can always reach out to me. My information is down below. And guys, please also be sure you're commenting with all your questions, okay? I'd love to see your comments and what your questions are about exercise prescription and everything else that we're talking about here. All right, that said, now let's move on to number 5. My 5th item here is recovery. Recovery is huge, and this is a big, big part of lifestyle. This is the topic that is not talked about enough in most fitness and health building circles. So let me explain in a nutshell what recovery is like. It may or may not require stretching. For some people, there is really no stretching necessary. For others, it can be hours per week. It really depends a lot about lifestyle, ergonomics, how you sit, how much time you spend sitting, how heavy the strength training was, if any, et cetera, et cetera. Just so many factors go into recovery. And there's certainly no app to teach you this, so that is just not out there. So I very highly, again, really recommend you work with a top coach, either someone here at Perfect Personal Training or find a top coach on your own, preferably someone who has the right college background. Generally, multiple certifications in health coaching and fitness training is going to be your best way to go. All right, all of that said, now let's talk a little bit more about some components that make up recovery. Sleep is a big part of it. As I've said before in other videos, it's not about how many hours you sleep necessarily, and it's not about how refreshed you feel in the morning. It's really more about training your body to have the same bedtime and same wake time. I say this in a lot of videos because it is so clinically sound. It really makes a big difference. You want your brain chemistry to be just right while you're sleeping. You want your body to be in a rhythm and know what processes it should be taking and when. And if you have disruptive sleep schedules, like if you're going to bed at 9 o'clock one night and then 11 o'clock the next night and then 12 and then 9 again, if you're all over the place like that, and if you're waking up at different times as well, it's going to be really hard for your body to have very restorative, clinically productive sleep. And finally, I'll also briefly mention both hydration as well as supplementation. Staying hydrated should be the easiest thing to do, but almost nobody does it. It's very critical so that all of your biological processes can take place appropriately. They won't do well if they don't have enough water in your system. And supplementation as well. Almost everybody has some sort of vitamin or mineral deficit. Taking supplements is a fantastic way, especially if you really do it right and get the dosing right. It's a fantastic way to aid your body in its recovery between workouts so that you can lose more weight and get out of clinical obesity. As always, everybody, my name is Val Fiott. Please comment down below with your questions. If you have not already, please be sure to like and subscribe so I can get more videos like this to you in the future. And you can always reach out to me privately so we can speak more specifically about your own unique needs. My phone number is down below. Everyone, I'm looking forward to your health and your wellness success.